Mr. Wide Angle Lens is going to see all this. I'm not used to working with wide angle lenses. Um, Basically, this is a page I did in my Reckless Journal book. I put it up on my blog on Tumblr, littlewalkin.tumblr.com, and it has gotten a lot of interest, and so I'm going to show you what it is I did to get this. It is going to take only a few supplies that you probably already have, but it will take a little bit of drying time, so it's just going to depend on your weather and all that. You're going to need markers. Now, I use Crayola, because one thing I learned back when I was 10 years old and they still had arts in school is that if you get Crayola markers wet, they're going to bleed, they're going to paint, they're going to run. I'm also using black ink. This particular one is Higgins. I think the key is actually, you don't really need a waterproof. This one just happens to be waterproof. And I picked up on this jar out of my stash because it's got the least amount of stuff in it. I wanted to use it up. And then I've got a couple of color inks. Got these, God, about the turn of the century because I haven't really been using them. Important thing for this project is that these have droppers. And then you're going to want water and any old paintbrush that you have. Turn this off. 3-ring binder. This one is a 2-inch. You just want something that's going to have a bit of an angle going on. The book was a lot easier to stand up vertically, which as we get going you'll see is half the trick. You're also going to want a towel or something underneath it. It is going to get messy. Again, you're working with drips, you're working with wet, so you want to make sure that is something that you are comfortable with. Now, step 1 is get out your markers and pick an edge, and we're going to color on it. Nice little edge of colored Crayola, and then pretty much this is something that only Crayolas do. You get your brush out, you get it nice and wet. You want to use, this is a round brush, but more important, this is kind of a, I guess this is a mop. I never really learned much with brushes. Grew up quite literally starving artist, so I learned to make do with whatever I could afford and be really not cheap, because as you can see I've paid for some nice ink and all that, but frugal and getting the most bang for my buck. But you get your brush nice and wet, especially if it's a mop, and you want to really get in there. This isn't even watercolor paper. This is out of something else. You're going to take it, you're going to try, keep it just, dip it in one color at a time. Unless you want to blend them, but the way this went, they were not blended. Dipping the brush each time before it goes into each color. As you can see, this paper, now this paper might not drip. You have to experiment. This paper is actually starting to bleed. This, I think, came out of I bought a, if you tilt it up like that, so you're going to start getting bleeds. This paper came out, I don't even know where this paper came out of. I'll rip paper out of books or whatever and just squirrel it away. But, so you might need to go back, put on a second coat. Maybe color, do all your coloring before you paint, because once it gets wet like this, you're not going to be able to paint back over it. But see, this is where the book worked. If you hold it upright, and just play around with the paper, because you don't know what you're going to get out of any paper until you use it. So you just keep adding more water. Get your markers to drip. But you can already see that, if you just play around with Crayola markers, you're going to be able to get some neat color effects and all that. Each layer, when you do this, we're going to let it dry, so while that's drying, I will just flip through here. Ah, here it is. This is another page. Both of these were done with Crayola markers and water. This one, originally I drew a target and a couple stripes at the bottom, but this was target shaped, and again, I took a very wet brush and just kept dripping the water on it, watching the color. You laid it flat, watch the colors bleed, watch them just do what they were going to do. Later on, drips, I just went and dripped the water across it. This one was just scribbling, taking the brush, washing over it. You can still see some lines. There's a few more pages in this thing. This is ink. This is not gonna get wet, but that's ink and a brush. Some of them aren't done. Some of them I've done things that I don't want to share yet. This is one of the earlier experiments with the markers and letting them drip. It was just supposed to be those three colors, the orange little spot here and all that leaked in from wherever. I'll lay the book flat and just lay it open to dry and just let it leak in or bleed or wherever. Here's another one. This picture here is a mixture of colored pencils where it doesn't bleed, and these are actually watercolor crayons. I don't personally know if you can do this with Crayola crayons. I used actual watercolor crayons, but the sucker is a Crayola marker. Over here, the tongue painting spot, I think actually this is the drip ink. This is, but again, I got it wet and then dripped it. It's going to be something I'll show you here in a minute when we do this next layer on our picture. Here's more marker. This page here, the grid. Drew the grid first, and then the white spots are drips of water. That one was a couple boo-boos turned up. And then I went and just touched it with my finger. The black spots are waterproof ink. This one here, I colored. I colored this page, but I got this side wet, and with this journal, it bled through, and it really looked nice. So we're just looking for some more. That was probably regular watercolor. I just had some left on my brush. Okay, here's more. Here's a line drawing with the markers, and I went in and I washed over it a little bit, and then just went, well, it's still wet, to see what would happen over on this side. So I do make dolls. At that time I was working on my Backstreet Boys. He doesn't count yet. We're not doing that. That's not. Here's waterproof ink. Yeah, well. And this is another one that I did with the markers. And what I kind of colored the whole thing with the light blue. And then I did the edges with the darker blue, and I did the little lines back here, trying to make it look like an ice cube. And I got the rest of the page wet, like especially under here. Once you color it, go in under here with your brush. Get this wet, get the rest of the page wet, and let it bleed. This one I went, and I'm pretty sure with the dark blue, while it was still wet, would add more lines to places. But this is similar to what we're working on underneath here with the colors and drips. That's all ink. So we will turn it off and wait for our next layer. You can work this project as wet or as dry as you want. Now, one thing, if you work it at the same angle, if I was going to do the paper like this and apply anything, the water would automatically follow these drips, which, if you look on the journal, happened here and here with the ink. So, depending on what angle you're going to go at, you want to wait a little bit of time. Now, here we're going to go with one of the inks. I These are the only two colors I happen to have with droppers are these, because I have the little speedball color set that I bought. Around about the turn of the century. I was fortunate enough to have a job that allowed me to go crazy a little bit, buy smart supplies, and I still have most of them because I've been keeping them nice. What you could do with your dropper, and this is why it's fun with the dropper, just go drop, drop, drop. And again, when I did it with the book, I stood the book straight up. I was doing it with the journal, and then you take a drip of water. I got a new, one of those water brushes with the water reservoir in the handle. But, long story short, I don't want to use it on this. I'm only using it with a few colors because I don't want to stain the tips. The bristles are white, and I've had white brushes before. I did a painting that I used blue very early in it, and the brush remained blue. But see, you do this, and you got to stand up your drips, and this is why you have your little work towel. Middle of August, and I'm wearing Halloween pajamas, but my 13th dog Xavier arrived on Halloween, and it's part of his story and all that, so Halloween is a lifestyle. But see, this is where, with the book, I'm going vertical. Now this time, definitely, you're going to have to really, really let it dry, because if you don't, you're not going to get too much variation in your stripes. This paper, I don't know how long it's going to take to dry, and you know what? Do I think I care? Not really. So we're going to take waterproof black. Huh. Okay, it looks like the other colors are waterproof too. Like I care? You get what you get sometimes, and that's the only yellow they have. That's the only yellow they have. Oh, I can still open it. Okay, now this, I'm actually not, watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to dip the handle in. And then I'm going to, wow, that's gunky in the bottom. Okay. Dip the handle in. I'm going to look for places that do not have drips, and I'm just going to go dip the handle in this way. Hopefully the drips are not going to cross. And by using the handle, we're not going to get our bristles dirty, because stuff like black ink will decide that it never wants to come off your bristles. This is the first time, if you'll notice, that the waters get a little dirty. Maybe I shouldn't have dumped it in there. Again, I don't care. I'm going to let you know why. Back in 1994, I survived a traumatic brain injury, and the big hit was right behind my right eye, and so that part of my frontal lobe, where all my rat's asses and all that, where apparently took some damage. I spent a few years thinking, okay, maybe I'm depressed and all that, because I'm just not interested in things when I'm not interested in them. And I read a book called Tale of the Dueling Neurosurgeons that convinced me otherwise, that my brain is just, when it comes to some things, incapable of caring. You can see the ink is starting to bleed on this paper. Again, you don't know with some papers what you could get until you play with them. So you take a drop it on each ink blot. Works better with the book. See, now that one's going to follow that path, but you get what you get. And once you get things that drip, you want to stand them up. I have had this towel forever. There's no towel like a good work towel if you're not happy with enough drips or water. What I've been doing with that breakfast journal is playing little games called What Happens If I Do This? How big of a mess can I make? If you look at this towel, I can make quite a bit of a mess. And we're going to kind of speed through the rest of this. This is a project that you do as fast or as slow as you want, but as you can see, each time you add a color, change the angle, change the direction. Let gravity do most of the work. If you don't have a way to stand it up, you can take a regular old straw and you just blow on your drips. Watch them go places. That was a project that the other kids got to do in grade school on one of the many days I wasn't there. Or, you know, I don't know. But I figured out how to do it. And we just take our repress it all for that. Now I'm going to do this last one. I'm going to do a little differently. I'm going to get the paper wet first. And see, this paper is bleeding through. This is not a watercolor paper. This was torn out of, I bought a blank paper book at a bookstore because I liked the cover, and I have been keeping doodle journals for over 20 years now, and it turned out, instead of being the signatures being sewn in, that the paper was perforated, which, you know, if you're going to be keeping a book, shake up the ink. Perforated pages are not going to work for a sketchbook you plan on keeping for the rest of your life. Also helps if you can open your ink. Okay. Alright, cannot open that ink, so we're just going to use the yellow again. Not going to struggle with it. Tiny little hands. Don't like to hurt them, but then take your drips. And let's see. And we're going to let them run down our paper. See where this is going, and that is how I made my this journal page.